Okay, everyone. I hope you were able to complete this menu migration in your file before starting this exercise. Basically, here is my changes. Okay, so I did them all for each of these elements, and now you'll see if I preview this that I have all of these elements in place. They all have the rollover effect on them. And basically, I now have this navigation being entirely controlled visually with CSS rather than it being controlled with HTML using the structural image tag. The whole reasoning for this, if you remember, was because it would be very difficult for me to change these styles or these images when I put this into a mobile environment, and because they weren't CSS. And media queries really only allows us to change CSS. So that being said, I'm just going to plop this off the screen here for a minute, and I want to talk about the next step of this process. Now, in our example, if you remember, let's look back here at this mobile version of this. Okay, here it is right here. We have some text here, some more text. These are pretty standard fonts. But this font right here for the tagline, inspire, create, and play, and now these new text elements that we want to show up, those were, if you remember, a little bit different. Okay, we use a font called Impact to do that, and on computers, Windows, Macs, Impact is a pretty standard font. I would say pretty much found on most flavors of Windows and most Macintosh installations. But it is possible you wouldn't have that font. But on mobile devices, that font is not going to be present. Mobile devices tend to have very minimal of fonts installed on them. So if we want to actually use this font in our exercise, we have to actually download the font when we actually download the web page. So we're going to talk about how to do this with CSS. Okay, up till now, we've been using pretty standard built-in fonts to do our typography, but today we're going to actually shift that. Now, I've already included an external CSS file here called typography. Here it is right here, and I want to explain how this CSS works. Okay, because right now what we have is I have a definition in here using a new CSS selector that we haven't talked about. It's called the @font face. Okay, so this is another one in that group of fonts, that selector. Okay, we saw @media and a couple others of these. So this is @font face. Okay, oops, sorry about that. And then basically, once you use that inside your curly brackets, you have to define a couple different things. Now, first thing you have to define is the font family property, and this is going to be the name of the font. Now, the name of the font can essentially be anything, but what you do want to keep in mind is that this name is going to be used later on in your CSS to apply this font that you're downloading and installing onto your web page. So whatever the name is, you should probably remember what it is so you could use it later on. Okay, and then once you download your sources, you name your font, essentially you need to define some sources. Now, there's a few different sources here we're going to talk about, but right now, unfortunately, in a web browser, there are competing standards for downloadable fonts. And those competing standards involve using different types of fonts in different environments. So, for example, right now, we have this type of font here called the EOT type of font. Okay, and this is primarily used for the last versions of Internet Explorer for Microsoft. Okay, this is called embedded type, I believe it is. Embedded open typography is what it stands for. Okay, and then this next one right here, the WOFF, stands for web open format fonts. Web open fonts, that's what it is. Sorry, sometimes I remember these acronyms. Web open fonts. Okay, and this is pretty much an up and coming standard by the World Wide Web Consortium. And then the next one you have here, and this is pretty much supported, has some good support. The only browser that doesn't really support it is Microsoft. Okay, whereas here, TTF TTF has great support across all browsers, okay? True type font, okay? That's a pretty standard piece of typography for anybody who works in fonts a lot. It's a pretty strong font, okay? And then finally, we have this last one here, SVG, which is used on Apple mobile devices, okay? So you'll find here that the SVG file type is used on iOS to render out fonts on iPhones. So a very important market, right? So basically what we're doing here is we're supplying, especially in these lines here, multiple sources for our fonts, and all you do is use the SRC, the URL, and then the path to where that downloadable font is stored, right? And then we have these format commands here, okay? And I'm going to show you how to, well, I'll show you this in a second, but basically, once you have these in place, you put this in place, the next step would be to actually apply this. So anywhere I want to use this font, I would just have to say font family, impact. You should think of this @fontface command as sort of being a definition of the typography. And then when you apply it, you can apply it on any other CSS selector. All you need to do is to refer to its name. Okay? So it's a pretty standard thing here. Now, you might be wondering, well, where am I going to get these fonts? How am I going to deal with this? What's the story here? Okay? Well, there's a lot of resources out there for fonts, but one that I really like a lot here is called Font Squirrel. Okay? And what Font Squirrel does is has a whole series of different fonts that you can download and use. Most of them are free of charge. Just be wary of that. If you're using it professionally, you will have to either pay for your font licensing or use one that's free of charge. And the way this works is that if you want to use a specific font, you have to kind of end up with all these different types of fonts to support all your different environments. So what you can do is you can use something on Font Squirrel called the generator. Okay? Now what the generator does is it takes a font, and let me just download a font really quick here. So I'll download this one right here. Oh, this is offsite. I want to download something on-site just to make my life easier. Let's see. So we'll do, here we'll do this one. Oh, it's offsite. We'll do this one right here. Okay. So I'll download that TTF. There it is. All right. So now if I go here, and I will open this up in my, let me just open this up in my Finder window here. Okay. Yeah, I got a lot of garbage on my computer. Okay. I just dragged that over to my desktop. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll just unzip it. So there it is. Now I can find it really easily, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my generator. Okay. And first thing it's going to ask you to do is to upload what font you want to convert. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll go here, and on my desktop, that was called PT Sans. So I see right here I have PT Sans, and I see that I have a bunch of different TTFs, right? So I kind of see, and I'm just going to grab one of them. I'm not going to get too into it. I just want to demo this. So I'll grab this one right here, okay? And we'll open that up. Now, at basic, okay, if you just leave it the way it is and proceed, you're going to get some fonts, but you're not going to get them all. So what I recommend people do is that they go to the experts section, hit that little radio button. In the experts section, you can choose everything you want. So I'll choose 2Type, EOT, SVG, right? And then basically everything else I think I'll leave. Okay, that all looks good. And then the last thing you need to do is to check yes here. Okay, it's assuring that the fonts you're using, you have legal right to them. It's the legal stuff. Okay, and then once you have that, you're going to get this option called download your kit. Okay, so what it's going to do, it's going to go through a process of taking the font that you uploaded and generating all the other fonts that it needs, right? And then basically what it's going to do is once it does that, it's going to download a nice little package for you. There it is. It just downloaded of all those elements, right? So I'm just going to look at this here. I'll just show that in the Finder. I'll unzip it. I'll open this up. Now here's what was generated by Font Squirrel. Okay, And if you look in here, you'll see that we have not only the EOT, the SVG, the TTF, the WOOF, and the WOOF2, but we have a nice little demo file here, right? And if you open that up, here's a kind of listing of the font and how it looks. You have some different, how it looks in layout, some different glyphs and how the glyphs will look. And then you have the last one, which is how to instructions on how to install the web font. Okay, so you'll see here that they have all the code you need, right? And explaining how to apply this, right, and put it in place. And basically these instructions are what I used to sort of generate this file right here. Okay, now yeah, you have to edit it, you have to input the name, you got to put the correct paths to where it's located, all that kind of stuff. But once you get that file out of FontSquirrel, really you just need to cut and paste it into your code. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to link to this externally, right? So what I'm going to do is I have this graphic here already, this file, sorry, this typography style already in an external CSS here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my index file here, and on the top, here's my style sheet that we externalized. I'm going to make a second link. Link href equals quote, and I'm going to call it typography .css, and I'll put type equals text .css, and rel equals quote style sheet. Oh, right. So now I've just linked to this external style sheet that has all of my typography in it. And now I'm ready to be able to use this font in a mobile environment, or even an environment on a website or a web browser that doesn't have this font, and my fonts will render. Okay, so I haven't had to do this yet because I haven't had to write the code out to actually display any of these fonts. But if I do a quick save all here, right, and I do a refresh on this, okay, I see my fonts are rendering, so I know either one of two things. Either my external links are working, or my my machine has this font, which the latter is true for me. I know my machine has this font. Okay, but if I was looking at this on my phone, I'm pretty sure my phone does not have this font. So we would need to take that into account. Okay, so the takeaway from this exercise is that when you're designing a mobile version of a website, one of the things you need to take into account is that the type